On the day of my in-laws' 50th wedding anniversary, I took my son's hand to introduce him to my sister-in-law, who had arrived late. "This is my son, Richard." "Richard, why don't you say hello?"
"I'm Richard, and I'm 5.
Richard clung closely to me, shyly greeting Sophia while looking up at her intently. I continued. "Sophia, as I mentioned in the letter, my son has a congenital condition." Before I could finish, Sophia blurted out,
"Oh! What a monster! Don't let him near my kid! He'll infect her!"
In that instant, both Richard and I froze as if time had stopped. I noticed my brother-in-law's face, clearly uncomfortable, with a look that showed he wanted to stay as far away as possible. Jason and my in-laws were also stunned, standing silent and motionless. I was overwhelmed with disbelief. How could she say something like that to such a young child? Unsure of what to say to Sophia and her thoughtlessness, I stood there, paralyzed, until a quiet voice beside me brought me back to reality.
Am I being hated again?
Richard looked down, struggling to hold back tears. Words that would hurt even an adult were spoken to a child, and it was impossible for him not to feel the pain. "It's not contagious. It's called albinism. He was just born with lighter pigmentation."
See? It's still a disease. Of course it's contagious. Just take that ugly kid somewhere else. Get him out of here.
Beside me, my husband's hand was trembling with anger. As the argument escalated, I saw tears well up in Richard's eyes, large drops spilling over. Just as Jason looked ready to confront Sophia, my father-in-law intervened.
"That's enough. Don't show your face here ever again."
Sophia and her husband looked relieved, as if finally finding someone who understood them, and smirked triumphantly. But that smirk quickly vanished, replaced by a look of shock.
What? Dad, what are you doing?
My name is Olivia. I'm a 40-year-old homemaker, living with my husband, Jason, and our son, Richard. Though it's just the three of us now, 5 years ago, I could never have imagined this happy life. Ever since we got married, we struggled to have children. I wanted a child, and so did Jason, so I started going to an obstetric clinic for fertility treatments. Sometimes, it was hard to sit in the waiting room and see the bellies of pregnant women beside me, but I kept telling myself that children are gifts we receive. Despite being careful with my diet and health, there were days when I wondered why a child hadn't come to us, and I felt frustrated with myself. Fertility treatments were tough, financially draining, and there were nights I cried myself to sleep. But Jason was always there, standing by my side. He held my hand, encouraged me, and even came along to the hospital, giving me more strength than I could have imagined.
"It'll be okay. I'm sure one day, a baby will see us and decide to come here."
Somehow, those words lifted me up and made me more hopeful, and after that, I stopped worrying as much and looked forward with optimism. The following year, thanks to fertility treatments, I was able to get pregnant. When we told Jason's parents, they were overjoyed. The baby grew in my belly, and soon the due date arrived. When I heard my child's first cry, I was flooded with relief and couldn't wait to see his face. But when I looked at my newborn, he had white skin and hair so delicate that he looked like a little angel who might break with a touch. Jason and I were both stunned. Neither of our families had anyone with such a unique appearance, and we were completely confused. Why? To our bewilderment, the doctor explained that our baby had a congenital condition known as oculocutaneous albinism, or simply, albinism.
Albinism? You mean that condition that affects about 1 in 20,000 people?
It's a rare disease, classified as a specified incurable condition. Besides distinctive appearance, people with albinism often struggle with vision issues and heightened sensitivity to UV light. I was heartbroken that the child we had hoped for, who had finally come after all the infertility treatments, had a condition. I regretted that we couldn't give him a life without challenges. But as I held my baby, that regret faded instantly, and I found myself hugging him tightly. A rare disease doesn't matter. Our child is precious, beautiful, like a little angel.
You were right. This child chose us. Thank you. Thank you.
Neither Jason nor I felt hopeless or disappointed. Instead, we welcomed our long-awaited child with overwhelming positivity and hope. We named him Richard and resolved to raise him with all the love we had. We took Richard to visit his grandparents, introduced him as our little angel, and though they were initially surprised, his innocent smile seemed to melt their hearts.
It might be difficult in the future, but if it's you too, I'm sure you can get through anything.
If you ever need help, don't hesitate to rely on us. We'll support you as much as we can.
With those words, they accepted Richard and promised to help us raise him with love. For Richard's daily life, we mainly needed to be mindful of his sensitivity to UV light and his weak eyesight. We always applied sunscreen when going outside, and he used assistive devices for his vision. Thankfully, I could connect online with other mothers facing similar challenges, so I didn't feel alone in this journey. Although we had to take extra care with certain things, Richard was otherwise healthy and grew into a lively little boy. As Jason and I watched him gain new abilities one by one, the years quickly flew by. Over those years, during summer vacations, Christmas, and long weekends, our family would visit my in-laws whenever possible. They lived just 2 train stops away, and my father-in-law usually picked us up at the station to make things easier for Richard. Thank you for always helping us.
It's nothing. I can't wait to see my grandson.
Richard was always in high spirits once he got in the car. While he certainly loved cars, there was a more pressing reason for his happiness: the stares of strangers on the train. Some people would glance at him curiously or even whisper and move away. On several occasions, someone had even taken a photo with their phone, and I had to ask them to stop, shielding Richard behind me. As his mother, those moments saddened and angered me, wondering why people would behave that way. Richard had become so self-conscious on the train, especially after he turned 5. He would cling to Jason or me, or even to his grandparents, trying to hide. Knowing how hard this must be for Richard made my heart ache. One night, before bed, Richard asked us a question.
Mom, Dad, am I strange? Does everyone hate me?
What? Of course not. Why would you think that?
Because, on the train, everyone keeps staring at me.
His words were simple, but hearing him express his feelings was painful, and my heart felt heavier than ever. Jason seemed to feel the same, his expression troubled as he listened. I hugged Richard tightly, looked him in the eyes, and spoke. You're not strange, and nobody hates you. Even if people look, you can stand tall and be proud of who you are. Richard's eyes welled up a bit, but he listened quietly and finally replied,
Okay, I understand.
Richard, would you like to sleep with Dad tonight?
Yeah. Read the caterpillar book.
Jason enthusiastically took Richard's hand and led him to the bedroom. Watching them go, I stayed in the living room alone, sighed, and whispered to myself. With my in-laws' golden wedding anniversary coming up, I'm a little worried. At least at kindergarten, the teachers could help explain Richard's condition to the other kids. But it was different in public places, where understanding was often harder to find. As I pondered how to handle these challenges, I spoke with other mothers, searching for solutions to guide both Richard and ourselves forward. Just recently, Jason brought up the idea of celebrating his parents' golden wedding anniversary. He mentioned that his sister, Sophia, who lives far away, would also be coming, and suggested that we celebrate it grandly with her family joining in.
Richard hasn't met my sister yet, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity. What do you think?
Oh. Your sister too? To be honest, I didn't have a particularly good impression of his sister, Sophia. Her family moves often due to her husband's job, and I've only met her once or twice. When Richard was born, I sent her a letter, but there was no reply. I couldn't help but wonder if she really cared about our family, which made me feel uneasy about introducing Richard to her. When I mentioned this to Jason, he just smiled.
Don't worry. My sister isn't that bad of a person. And her husband has always been kind to me.
Right. I suppose. Maybe I was worrying too much because I hadn't interacted with her much. Perhaps Sophia and her husband were actually kind people, and maybe she just didn't have the time to reply to my letter back then. After all, they were coming from afar to celebrate their parents' milestone anniversary, and I couldn't ignore the sincerity in that. Though I still worried about how they'd respond to Richard, wondering if they'd look at him as strangers do on the train, I agreed to let her family join. And so, with my anxieties still present, the day of the golden anniversary arrived. Due to train schedules, Sophia and her family were arriving later, so Jason and I escorted his parents to a high-end restaurant we had reserved for the occasion. When I told the staff about our reservation, the hostess led us to an elegant room. My in-laws smiled joyfully as they walked hand-in-hand with Richard to their seats. The room, softly lit with ambient lighting, could fit about 10 people and had a calm, refined atmosphere.
Grandpa and Grandma are happy. I'm happy too.
Yes, Richard. We're all happy.
Richard, sensing it was a special day, beamed with joy. Dressed in a new outfit we had bought for the occasion, he looked especially adorable, even making the hostess smile as she guided us in. After chatting for a while, Sophia's family arrived. They were dressed formally, and Richard's cousin, Mary, wore an adorable dress.
Sorry we're late. Dad, Mom, congratulations.
She dropped her bag onto a chair and greeted her parents, while her husband and Mary each offered their own warm congratulations. Once they settled in, I took a moment to greet Sophia's family, a bit nervously. Sister-in-law, it's been a while. Thank you for coming all the way here for today.
Huh? Oh, yeah.
But she responded coolly, almost as if she didn't know me at all. Pulling myself together, I took Richard by the hand to introduce him. This is my son, Richard. Richard, can you say hello?
I'm Richard. I'm 5.
Clinging tightly to me, Richard looked at Sophia shyly but managed to greet her. Sister-in-law, as I mentioned in my letter, Richard was born with a congenital condition. Before I could finish, Sophia cut me off with a blunt remark.
Oh! What a freak! Keep him away from my kid, okay?
In that instant, both Richard and I froze, as if time had stopped. I noticed her husband's expression, clearly uncomfortable and visibly wanting to stay away. Jason and his parents were also speechless, paralyzed by shock. I couldn't believe what I had just heard, especially directed at such a young child. I stood there, unsure how to respond to Sophia's cruel words, until I was brought back to reality by a small voice beside me.
Mom, am I being hated again?
Richard looked up at me anxiously, holding my hand. Without missing a beat, Sophia laughed and said,
Of course you are! No one wants to look at your face, Richard!
Richard lowered his head, fighting back tears. Hearing such hurtful words, words that would wound any adult, was unbearable for a child. I felt an impulse to slap Sophia, but instead, I held Richard tightly. How dare you say that, sister-in-law? That's not true.
Yes, Sophia. How could you say something so terrible?
My mother-in-law hugged Richard and me protectively.
What? Are you actually defending that little freak? He's gross, with almost completely white hair. Is it an infection? Get him away from us.
It's not an infection. And it's not contagious. It's called albinism, a condition where he was born with low pigmentation.
So it is a disease. That means it is contagious. Why did you even bring him here? Mary, stay away from him.
Sophia, stop it! Richard is not a freak, and it's not a contagious disease. Don't treat him like he's some kind of outcast.
Jason, is that really your child? I find that hard to believe.
Why can't you understand, sister?
Just take that ugly kid somewhere else already. Get him out of here.
Jason's hand was trembling with anger. As he looked ready to confront Sophia, his father intervened.
That's right. Never show your face here again.
Sophia and her husband, initially looking smug, thinking they'd found an ally, were stunned by his words.
Wait! Dad, what are you doing?
Without a word, my father-in-law grabbed their belongings and tossed them out of the room. Brushing his hands off, he turned back to them and said,
Is this how you treat a well-mannered child who just came to greet you for the first time? You are not my daughter. You are the monsters here. I don't want to see your ugly faces.
But, Dad, what if you or Mom catch something? I'm only worried.
Enough. If you truly cared about us, you would have considered Richard's feelings. Why didn't you?
But it's obvious. I mean, anyone would think that.
Stop spewing such heartless words. Get out of here.
None of us had ever seen my father-in-law so angry. Sophia and her husband shrank back, hesitating as they muttered. Then a voice interrupted.
Stop it already.
We all turned to see that the voice belonged to Mary, who stood there, her face red and her shoulders shaking.
Albinism isn't contagious, and he's not a freak. Why would you say something so awful? You're the worst, both of you.
Tears streaming down her cheeks, she spoke up for Richard, showing how deeply she cared. Her words touched me. But even then, Sophia snapped at her.
Be quiet, Mary. You don't know anything.
No, Mom, you're the one who doesn't understand. I'm so ashamed of you. Not even trying to understand Richard. I hate you both.
With Mary's almost shouting voice, Sophia and her husband paled. But Mary ignored them, ran over to Richard, and, like a big sister, gently patted his head.
Don't cry. It's okay to smile. You're not a freak, and no one hates you. The ones saying those things are wrong.
Okay.
Both Mary and Richard's faces were wet with tears and sniffles. While Sophia and her husband clearly couldn't comprehend Richard, Mary seemed to. Seeing that, I felt relieved. Sophia, realizing Mary was comforting Richard, finally came to her senses. She took Mary's hand and left without a word, pulling her husband along. They must have noticed that other diners, drawn by Mary's voice, had started to gather outside, making them feel uncomfortable enough to leave. As a few staff members guided the onlookers back to their seats, we resumed our conversations as if nothing had happened. The rest of the evening continued in peace, without tears or harsh words about Richard. The golden wedding anniversary came to an end without incident, and as we returned to our usual routines, I found myself pondering a question. How did Mary know about albinism? Jason, did you talk to her on the phone?
No, I didn't. I thought you might have told her.
It was puzzling because neither of us had ever mentioned Richard to her directly. Just as I was feeling a strange sense of mystery, we received a letter from Mary. She'd apparently gotten our address from my in-laws. Written on cute, heart-patterned stationery that seemed typical of a young schoolgirl, Mary's letter was filled with her carefully written thoughts. That evening after dinner, we decided to read it together. The letter began, "To Richard, Mom, and Dad," and inside was Mary's own perspective on people with albinism. Mary had often had to switch schools due to her parents' circumstances, and she had changed schools 3 times. In one of those schools, there was a child with albinism just like Richard. That child had white hair and wore special glasses for their vision impairment, and Mary recalled how their homeroom teacher explained this to the whole class. The classmates all respected that child, and Mary came to like them very much.
They were so kind to everyone, never worrying about their condition. I thought they were really cool and, honestly, I had a crush on them. They were amazing, they even sang well and could play the piano, using their keen hearing to make up for their weak vision. I wanted to be kind like them. But my mom didn't see it that way.
One day, during a parent gathering, Sophia spotted Mary with the child who had albinism and immediately frowned.
Mary, what's with that kid? Dyeing their hair at their age? What are they trying to do? And those awful glasses. Don't you see how bad they look? Mary, you shouldn't be hanging out with them, understand?
Mary wrote that she was filled with disbelief and a sense of disgust. It had been incredibly painful to witness her mother saying such heartless things, and she regretted not speaking up at the time.
So when it came to Richard, I finally felt like I could say what I couldn't say back then. It was a relief.
As I read, my chest tightened, realizing that she had harbored those feelings beside her parents all throughout the golden wedding anniversary. After that, Mary had settled into her current school, and during a recent school event, she read an essay she'd written about albinism and her parents' behavior.
My parents refused to try to understand albinism and ended up calling my cousin a monster. To me, it's the hearts of people who say things like that are monstrous.
She expressed a wish for others to learn about albinism so that no one else would say hurtful things like her parents had. She hoped her classmates would create a respectful and supportive community, like she'd experienced in her previous school. Her essay received praise from those in attendance. Meanwhile, Sophia and her husband faced a barrage of disapproving looks and were utterly humiliated. Following that school event, they were subjected to judgmental glances from neighbors and other parents, which led to Sophia scolding Mary repeatedly. Yet, Mary didn't seem to mind. She wrote that she wanted to become someone who could spread awareness and offer support for people with albinism as she grew older.
Richard, hold your head high, and be someone who's kind to others. I'll do my best, too. See you again.
The letter ended with that message, and it was decorated with stickers of cartoon characters, likely from a little girl's magazine, one of which had a speech bubble that read, "I'm on your side." Although Richard couldn't yet read all difficult words and didn't fully grasp the meaning, I read it to him carefully, and he beamed as he repeated, "On my side. On my side." Seeing this, Jason and I felt a wave of joy, and before we knew it, we were all laughing together. Since that golden anniversary, it seems Richard remembers Mary's words. Whether on the train or at kindergarten, he's now holding his head high, no longer shrinking away. I can't say exactly what changed in him, but he seems to have understood Mary's words in his own way. One day, as we rode the train to visit my in-laws, we took our seats as usual. Nearby, I noticed 2 or 3 high school girls watching Richard and whispering, covering their mouths while smirking. "What is that?" "White hair," they giggled. I considered moving to a different car, but then I saw Richard had noticed them, too. He stared at them intently. "Richard?" I called to him gently, and he looked at the girls and flashed them a warm smile. The girls, clearly surprised, looked flustered and quickly moved to another car. Since then, there have been a few times when people whispered or stared, but Richard just smiles back each time. It seems to unsettle them. They stop whispering, avert their eyes, and start fidgeting with their phones. I found myself wondering where he learned this little trick of his for handling such situations. Then, I remembered that day. Mary had told him,
"Don't cry, it's okay to smile."
Her words must have stayed with him. Not all unkind people, those who laugh or insult others over their appearance, have disappeared. In fact, he'll likely encounter many more as he grows up. But rather than relying on me to shield him, he's learned to protect himself. Seeing him grow in this way filled me with joy. Our child, who came into our lives, is trying so hard to live strongly. It may be thanks to Mary. I often think how wonderful it would be if there were more kind children like her. When I shared this story with some of my friends, several other moms agreed, and we even started holding small study sessions at the community center. If both people with differences and those around them could better understand each other, I believe kind hearts could connect, making the world a little gentler. I hope more people like Mary will come to understand those with disabilities, showing kindness to everyone without discrimination. I hope for a world where people like Richard can live positively, with courage and strength. How did you like today's story? Please remember to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.